What happens when the perfect marriage is built on a foundation of perfect lies? For Elara, Van's life was a fairy tale. She was the brilliant architect, married to Damien Blackwood, the charismatic billionaire CEO of a global empire. They had it all: penthouse views, endless wealth, and a baby on the way. But behind the shimmering facade of their life, a dark secret was festering. This isn't just a story about a cheating husband. It's the story of how a pregnant, heartbroken wife, armed with nothing but her intellect and a will of iron, didn't just walk away. She orchestrated the most spectacular corporate takedown in modern history, claiming the entire Amhur for herself. The penthouse apartment on the 80th floor of Manhattan's 157 was less a home and more a statement. It was a testament to the colossal success of Damien Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Holdings, a sprawling conglomerate with tentacles in tech real estate and private equity. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Central Park, a sprawling green carpet laid out for its masters. For Elara Vance Blackwood, this view had once been a symbol of shared dreams. Now it felt like the edge of a gilded cage. Elara, a celebrated architect before she married Damien, had an eye for structure, for the truth of a building's bones beneath the polished marble and glass. She had applied the same principle to her marriage, believing its foundation was solid. They had met 7 years ago at a charity gala. He was the city's most eligible bachelor, exuding a predator's charm. She was the up-and-coming architect whose sustainable designs were disrupting the industry. He was captivated by her brilliance, her refusal to be impressed by his name alone. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jets to Paris, for dinner, exclusive viewings at the Met, and whispered promises under starry Hampton skies. Their life was a meticulously curated masterpiece. Damien, with his custom Brioni suits and Patek Philippe watch, was the picture of power. Elara, elegant and poised, was his perfect counterpart. But lately the masterpiece had begun to show cracks, tiny fissures only she could see. It started with the late nights. Board meetings running over. He'd say, his voice a smooth baritone over the phone. Then came the business trips, sudden and frequent, to Geneva or Singapore. He'd return, smelling faintly of a perfume she didn't wear, something floral and cloying, a stark contrast to her preferred subtle woody scents. He'd dismiss her questions with a wave of his hand and a dazzling smile. "You worry too much, darling. It's just stress. We're closing the Vantage Core acquisition." But Elara knew stress. She knew the exhilarating pressure of a deadline, the weight of $1 billion project on her shoulders from her own career. Damien's stress felt different. It was secretive, evasive. The way his thumb would instinctively shield his phone screen when she entered the room, the way his laughter seemed a little too loud, a little too forced during his hushed late-night calls. The confirmation of her pregnancy 3 months ago should have been the happiest moment of their lives. Damien had been ecstatic, or at least he had performed ecstasy perfectly. He'd lifted her up, spinning her around in their cavernous living room, proclaiming, "A Blackwood heir, the dynasty continues." He'd bought her a ridiculous diamond necklace from Graf, a beautiful but cold offering that felt more like a transaction than a celebration. In the weeks that followed, his distance grew into a chasm. He was physically present but emotionally absent, his mind seemingly miles away, lost in a world she wasn't privy to. Tonight, the silence in the penthouse was deafening. Damien was supposedly at a dinner with investors from Bain Capital. It was nearly 1 a.m. Elara sat on a plush velvet sofa, a hand resting protectively on her gently swelling abdomen. The city lights below twinkled like a sea of fallen stars, indifferent to the storm brewing within her. A notification chimed on the tablet left on the coffee table. A shared family device for controlling the apartment's smart features. It was linked to their cloud account. A photo stream update. Normally she'd ignore it, but a strange cold dread coiled in her stomach. Her finger trembled as she tapped the screen. The photo that appeared wasn't from Damien's work phone. It was from a personal device she didn't know he had accidentally synced to their shared cloud. The image was a candid shot, a selfie. Damien was on a yacht, the sun setting over an azure sea, not the grey skyline of a business trip. He was laughing, his arm draped around a woman. The woman was young, with raven hair and sharp, ambitious eyes. She was wearing a bikini and Elara's favourite Cartier love bracelet, the one Damien had given her on their 2nd anniversary. Another photo showed them kissing a passionate, reckless embrace that stole the air from Elara's lungs. The location tag was painfully clear. St. Bart's. Last weekend. The same weekend, Damien was supposedly in a grueling series of meetings in Zurich. The world tilted on its axis. The architect in her saw the foundation of her life crumble into dust. Every late night, every sudden trip, every dismissive smile snapped into focus, forming a sickening mosaic of deceit. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a fact rendered in high-definition color. She scrolled numbly, her heart a block of ice in her chest. There were more photos. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, shopping sprees on Rodeo Drive, intimate moments in hotel suites that all screamed of a long-term established affair. The woman in the photos was Isabella Rossi, a junior VP in their mergers and acquisitions division. A shark in designer clothing. The sound of the private elevator whirring to life jolted her from her trance. A moment later, Damien strolled in, loosening his tie. "Long night," he sighed, dropping his briefcase. "Those guys from Bain drive a hard bargain." He stopped when he saw her face pale and tear-streaked in the dim light. "Elara. What is it? Is it the baby?" He rushed to her side, his face a mask of concern. It was a perfect performance, but she could now see the strings. She said nothing. She simply turned the tablet screen towards him. His face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions. Confusion, dawning horror, and finally a cold, hard mask of annoyance. The charm evaporated, replaced by the ruthless CEO who eviscerated competitors in the boardroom. "Elara, you shouldn't be snooping through my things," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Your things," she whispered the words like broken glass in her throat. "That woman is wearing my bracelet, Damien. You took her to our spot in St. Bart's. Was anything ever real?" He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of frustration, not remorse. "Look, it's not what you think. It's complicated." "Complicated?" The word was an insult. "No, it's brutally simple. You've been lying to me, to our family, while I am carrying your child." He had the audacity to look exasperated. "Don't be so dramatic, Elara. These things happen. It doesn't mean anything. It was a mistake, an escape. The pressure of the Vantage deal has been immense." He tried to touch her, but she recoiled as if from a flame. "An escape," she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "So your life with me, with our baby, is something you need to escape from." "That's not what I meant," he snapped. "You don't understand the pressures I'm under. My life isn't as simple as drawing blueprints." The condescension in his voice was the final blow. It wasn't just that he had betrayed her. He didn't even respect her. He saw her as a beautiful object, a part of the curated perfection of his life, not as an equal. The love she thought they had was an illusion. The man she married was a stranger, In that moment, something inside her shifted. The heartbreak, the raw, searing pain, began to cool, crystallizing into something hard and unyielding. It was the clear, cold focus she felt when a complex design problem presented itself. The gilded cage had shattered, and she would not be buried in the wreckage. She would build something new from the ruins. "Get out," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with the strength of steel. Damien stared at her, shocked. "What did you say?" "This is my home." "It was our home," she corrected, standing up, her hand never leaving her belly. "Now it's just a crime scene. Get out. Go to her. I need to think." He saw the look in her eyes, not the pleading of a broken wife, but the resolve of an adversary. He scoffed, grabbing his briefcase. "Fine. We'll talk in the morning when you've calmed down. You're being hysterical." As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her in the silent penthouse, Elara knew one thing with absolute certainty. There would be no more talking. There would only be action. Damien Blackwood had just made the gravest miscalculation of his life. He had underestimated his wife. The first light of dawn spilled over the Manhattan skyline, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and grey. Elara hadn't slept. The night was a maelstrom of grief, a tidal wave of sorrow that threatened to pull her under. She allowed herself the pain, let the tears fall, mourning the death of the future she had so carefully designed. But as the sun climbed higher, so did her resolve. Grief was a luxury. Survival was a necessity. Her child's future depended on it. Damien thought she was a hysterical, emotional woman who would cry, scream, and eventually, after some grand gesture, forgive. That's what his mother had always done. It's what the women in his circle did. They traded dignity for security. Elara was built from different material. Her father was a structural engineer who taught her that the most beautiful facades were worthless without an unbreachable core. She moved from the living room to the home office, a sleek space of glass and steel she had designed herself. This was her domain. She sat in the leather chair, the cool material a stark contrast to the fire in her veins. She wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. She was a strategist, and her first move was to understand the battlefield. She started with Isabella Rossi. A quick, discreet search revealed more than she'd expected. Isabella wasn't just a junior VP. Her rise at Blackwood Holdings had been meteoric, suspiciously so. She'd joined 3 years ago and had been promoted 4 times. Her name was attached as a junior lead on the highly sensitive Vantage Core acquisition, a position far above her official pay grade. It was clear Damien hadn't just given her jewelry. He had given her power. Elara's mind, trained to see patterns and connections, started working. The affair wasn't just a personal failing. It was a professional liability. A CEO sleeping with a subordinate on a major deal team was a catastrophic breach of corporate governance. But she needed more than just the affair. A messy divorce would be tabloid fodder. Damien would paint her as vindictive, use his army of lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell to bury her in litigation and likely win custody of their child by claiming she was emotionally unstable. She needed leverage that was undeniable. Something that threatened not just their marriage, but the very empire he worshipped. She remembered Damien's condescending words. "You don't understand the pressures I'm under." What pressures the Vantage Core acquisition was aggressive, but it was well within Blackwood Holdings' capacity, unless there was something more. Her gaze fell on Damien's personal office laptop, a sleek machine he rarely used, preferring his encrypted work devices. He'd once given her the password in a moment of feigned transparency. "So you always know where I am, darling." The irony was bitter. She booted it up, her heart pounding. The password still worked. The desktop was clean, but she wasn't looking for the obvious. She navigated to the cached files and temporary internet data, looking for digital breadcrumbs. And there she found it, a link to a secure off-network server. It required a separate login. She tried the usual combinations: birthdays, anniversaries, pet names, nothing. Then she remembered a conversation from years ago. He was boasting about his first major success, a small tech startup he'd built and sold in college. Its name was Ethelred, an obscure Anglo-Saxon king. "Always choose a password no one would ever guess," he'd said. "Something only you would know." She typed AETHELRED. Access granted. The server contained a parallel set of books, a shadow financial world. There were shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands and Panama, invoices for consulting fees paid to companies she'd never heard of. And at the center of it all was a project codenamed Project Cygnus. She spent the next several hours piecing it together, her architectural mind meticulously constructing the hidden structure of Damien's deceit. Project Cygnus was a clandestine real estate deal. Damien was using a series of shell companies funded by siphoning money from Blackwood Holdings' operational budgets under the guise of miscellaneous acquisition expenses to purchase large tracts of land in rural Nevada. Why Nevada? She dug deeper, cross-referencing land deeds with geological surveys. The land was directly in the path of a proposed high-speed rail line, a massive federal infrastructure project that was still in the confidential planning stages. If the project was announced, the value of that barren land would skyrocket, potentially by a factor of 100. Damien was using insider information. This wasn't just unethical. It was monumentally illegal. It was wire fraud, insider trading, and embezzlement, all rolled into one. The kind of crime that didn't just end a career, but led to a prison sentence. And then she saw the final devastating piece of the puzzle. The primary signatory on the largest of these shell corporations, Silver Arc Holdings, was not Damien Blackwood. It was Isabella Rossi. The sheer audacity of it left Alara breathless. Damien hadn't just been having an affair. He had made his mistress a co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise. He was building a separate fortune with her, a nest egg funded by theft from his own company, the company his father had built from the ground up. He wasn't just betraying his wife. He was betraying his own legacy. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Damien. She let it go to voicemail. He sent a text moments later. "Alara, this is ridiculous. I'm coming home so we can talk this out like adults." Another text followed. "Don't make me come up there. We have the foundation gala tonight. You will be there, and you will smile." It was a command, not a request. He still thought he held all the power. He thought his threat, his presence, was enough to bring her to heel. A cold, hard fury burned through her. The gala. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala for Children's Literacy was the crown jewel of the New York social season. It was a night of performance where the city's elite showcased their philanthropy and power. It was Damien's stage, and he expected her to be his silent, smiling prop. An idea began to form in her mind, sharp and dangerous. Damien wanted a performance. She would give him one he would never forget. She began meticulously downloading every file from the secret server onto a military-grade encrypted hard drive. Invoices, offshore account numbers, wire transfers, falsified expense reports, the deeds to the Nevada properties, and the incorporation documents for Silver Arc Holdings bearing Isabella Rossi's signature. She made 3 copies, hiding one in a secure location only she knew, and preparing the others. The sun was now high in the sky. Elara looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the office window. The woman staring back was not the same one from the night before. The soft vulnerability was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. The pain was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was now fuel. Damien Blackwood had built an empire on lies. He believed it was impregnable. But as an architect, Elara knew better than anyone that even the tallest skyscraper can be brought down if you know exactly where to strike its foundation, and she had just found the fault line. To execute a plan of this magnitude, Elara knew she needed more than just evidence. She needed an ally, someone who understood the intricate legal and corporate labyrinth of Blackwood Holdings. There was only one person who fit that description, but approaching him was a monumental risk. Julian Croft was the general counsel of Blackwood Holdings and Damien's personal lawyer. He was a man in his late 50s with a reputation for being shrewd, methodical, and fiercely loyal. He had been with the company since its early days, a confidant of Damien's father, Arthur Blackwood, before Damien took the reins. Julian was Damien's friend, his fixer, the man who made his problems disappear. Asking him to betray Damien was like asking a high priest to burn down his own temple. Yet Elara remembered moments of discord. She'd seen Julian argue with Damien in hushed, tense tones over increasingly reckless business gambles. Julian was old school. He believed in integrity, in the legacy of the Blackwood name. Damien saw the company as his personal piggy bank. Elara was betting on Julian's conscience being stronger than his loyalty. She scheduled a meeting at his private law firm's office, Kirkland & Ellis, not at Blackwood Tower, choosing a neutral ground. She used a burner phone to make the call, giving a false name. When she walked into the mahogany-paneled conference room, Julian Croft rose to his feet, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. Elara. Your assistant said it was a Mrs. Gable. What's going on? Is everything all right? No, Julian, nothing is all right, she said, her voice steady. She placed a thin black hard drive on the polished surface of the table between them. I need legal counsel, and I need it to be protected by attorney-client privilege before we go any further. Julian's eyes narrowed. He gestured for her to sit, his demeanor shifting from friendly concern to guarded professionalism. Of course, whatever you say in this room is confidential. What is this about? It's about Damien, she began. And it's about the systematic destruction of Blackwood Holdings from the inside. For the next hour, Elara laid it all out. She started with the personal betrayal, the affair with Isabella Rossi, not for sympathy, but to establish motive and a pattern of recklessness. She watched Julian's face. He showed no surprise, only a weary resignation, confirming Elara's suspicion that he already knew, or at least suspected, about the affair. Then she pivoted to the financial crimes. She connected the hard drive to the conference room's display, and with the precision of an architect presenting a blueprint, she walked him through Project Cygnus, the shell corporations, the embezzled funds disguised as acquisition costs, the insider trading scheme in Nevada, the wire transfers, and finally the documents bearing Isabella Rossi's signature. The room was silent, save for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Julian Croft stared at the screen, his face ashen. He scrolled through the documents, his legal mind dissecting every clause, every number. The evidence was irrefutable, a perfectly constructed case against his friend and client. I knew he was getting reckless. Julian murmured more to himself than to her. The risks he's been taking with the Vantage deal, pushing the boundaries of antitrust laws. But this is corporate suicide. It's federal prison. He's blinded by arrogance, Julian, Elara said. He thinks he's untouchable. He's building a new life, a new fortune with that woman, and he's using his father's company as his seed money. Julian leaned back in his chair, the weight of his dilemma etched onto his face. His loyalty was to Damien, the man he'd known for decades. But his legal and fiduciary duty was to the company, to its shareholders, and to the legacy of Arthur Blackwood, the man who had entrusted him with its protection. "What do you want, Elara?" he asked, his voice strained. "Do you want to file for divorce? Use this as leverage for a bigger settlement. We can do that quietly. I can make sure you and the child are set for life." This was the test. Elara looked him directly in the eye. "A settlement. You think this is about money? I had my own career, my own wealth before I met him. This is about justice. Damien is a cancer in that company. He will run it into the ground, ruin thousands of lives, and destroy his father's legacy, all for his own greed. He's not just my husband, he's your client. But Blackwood Holdings is also your client. And your duties to the corporation supersede your duties to its corrupt CEO." She had aimed her argument at his one unwavering principle, his duty. She pressed on. "I'm not going to the SEC or the FBI, not yet. A public scandal would tank the stock and hurt the very people we need to protect. I want to handle this internally. I want to save the company, not destroy it." "What are you proposing?" Julian asked, intrigued, despite himself. "I've reviewed my prenuptial agreement," Elara said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Julian himself had drafted it. "You were very thorough. There's the standard infidelity clause, which is financially punitive, but not catastrophic for him. But you also included at my insistence Clause 11B, the fiduciary duty clause." Julian's eyes widened slightly in recollection. It was an unusual clause she had fought for, a relic of her own business acumen. At the time, he'd thought it was clever but likely unnecessary. The clause stated that if either party in their professional capacity engaged in acts of moral turpitude or gross negligence that result in significant financial or reputational harm to shared marital assets, which included Damien's controlling shares in Blackwood Holdings, then the injured party had the right to extraordinary remedies. "The remedy," Elara continued, "is that Damien's voting rights in his personal shares are to be transferred to a blind trust, a trust to be administered by a neutral third party for the benefit of our child." "And the trustee?" Julian asked, already knowing the answer. "The agreement states the trustee is to be the other spouse should they be deemed legally and mentally competent. Me." The sheer brilliance of the strategy hung in the air. It wasn't a divorce ploy to take his money. It was a corporate coup executed through the fine print of their own marriage contract. She wouldn't take his shares, but she would take his power, effectively neutering him and seizing control of the company to protect it from his corruption. Julian was silent for a long time, staring at the mountain of evidence on the screen. He was witnessing the collision of two opposing loyalties. On one side was Damien, the reckless, arrogant son. On the other was Elara, the wronged but fiercely intelligent wife, and Arthur Blackwood's legacy which Damien was torching. Finally he closed the laptop and looked at her, a new light in his eyes. It was the look of a lawyer who had just found a case worth fighting for. "He's planning to announce the finalization of the Vantage Core acquisition at the Foundation Gala tonight," Julian said, his voice now crisp and decisive. "He sees it as his crowning achievement." I know, Elara said, and he's commanded me to be there, smiling by his side. Then that's where we make our first move, Julian said, a plan already forming. We can't challenge him on the floor of the gala. That would be messy and create panic. We need to be more precise. We need to control the narrative. We need to strike where the real power lies. The board of directors, Elara breathed. Exactly, Julian confirmed. Several of them are already uneasy with Damien's leadership. Margaret Croft from the pension fund, General McChrystal, even his own uncle Robert Blackwood. They respect the old ways. They will be at the gala tonight. You and I are going to have a few quiet, very private conversations. He stood up and extended his hand. Elara, you are no longer just my client's wife. You are now my client. And together, we are going to save Blackwood Holdings. As she shook his firm, steady hand, Elara felt a surge of hope. She was no longer alone. She had a powerful ally. The architect had her master builder. The foundation for her counteroffensive was now laid. The Blackwood Foundation Gala was the apotheosis of New York opulence. Held in the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Temple of Dendur, it was a glittering affair where titans of industry mingled with politicians and celebrities, all under the guise of charity. For Damien, it was the ultimate display of his dominion. When Elara arrived, a vision in a deep emerald gown that accentuated her pregnancy rather than hiding it. A quiet murmur went through the crowd. Her face was a mask of serene composure, revealing nothing of the tempest within. She walked to Damien's side, and he took her hand. His grip a little too tight, a silent warning. I knew you'd see sense, he whispered, his smile never faltering for the photographers. You look beautiful, radiant. The words were hollow, a script he recited with practiced ease. I'm here for the foundation, Damien, for the children, she replied, her voice just as smooth, her smile just as brilliant. The game had begun. While Damien held court, basking in the glow of adoration and power, Elara and Julian executed their silent coup. Julian, a respected figure in this world for decades, moved through the crowd with quiet purpose. His first target was Margaret Clark, the formidable head of the Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan, one of Blackwood's largest institutional investors. He found her near the reflecting pool, observing the spectacle with a cynical eye. Margaret, he began, his tone grave. A word, if I may. It concerns the fiduciary health of your investment. He didn't need to show her the evidence, not yet. He simply needed to plant the seed of catastrophic risk. He spoke of significant executive overreach, undisclosed liabilities related to the Vantage acquisition, and a critical failure of corporate governance. These were code words in their world phrases that signaled disaster. Margaret, whose primary duty was to protect the pensions of millions, listened with growing alarm. How critical, Julian? She asked, her gaze sharp. Potentially company ending, he replied without hyperbole. We may need to call an emergency board meeting, soon, to discuss a change in leadership. Next was General Marcus McChrystal Rhett, a man of unimpeachable integrity, who sat on the board to oversee their defense contracts. Julian found him discussing policy with a senator. He waited patiently, then drew the general aside. To him he spoke a different language, the language of honor and duty. General, there has been a profound breach of conduct at the highest level. Conduct that compromises not only the company's finances, but its character. It borders on treason to the legacy Arthur Blackwood built. The word treason struck a chord with the general. His face hardened. "What do you need, Julian?" "Your support when the time comes," Julian said simply. "It will come before dawn." Meanwhile, Elara played her part. Her target was Robert Blackwood, Damien's uncle, and his father's younger brother. Robert was a quiet, thoughtful man who had always been overshadowed by his more charismatic brother and nephew. He loved the company, but he disliked Damien's flashy, aggressive style of leadership. Elara found him looking at a display of artifacts. She approached him not with accusations, but with heartfelt concern. "Robert," she said softly, "I'm so worried about Damien." Robert turned his kind eyes filled with sympathy. "Elara, my dear, you look tired. This should be a happy time for you." "It is," she said, placing a hand on her belly. "But I see the stress Damien is under, the risks he's taking. He's not the man he used to be. He's not the man your brother raised." She let a tear well in her eye, a carefully calibrated performance of the worried wife. "He's become reckless. I'm afraid he's going to lose everything your family worked so hard to build." She had appealed to his sense of family, to his love for his brother's legacy. He patted her hand. "I've been worried too, Elara. He doesn't listen to my counsel anymore." "He might listen to the board," she suggested gently. "If they stood together to guide him, to protect the company from his impulses." She had laid the groundwork. They hadn't revealed the full extent of Damien's crimes, but they had primed the key players. They had created an atmosphere of crisis and doubt ready to be ignited. The final act of the evening was Damien's speech. He took the stage to thunderous applause, a conquering hero. Elara stood just off stage, watching him on the monitor, her expression unreadable. "Tonight we celebrate not just our commitment to literacy," Damien began, his voice booming with confidence, "but a new chapter for Blackwood Holdings. I am thrilled to announce that as of this morning we have successfully completed the acquisition of Vantage Corp, creating a global tech powerhouse." The room erupted in applause. Damien beamed, soaking it in. This was his moment of ultimate triumph. As he spoke, Elara walked away from the stage. Her part in this public charade was over. She took a service elevator down to the ground floor, where a car was waiting. It wasn't the chauffeured Maybach she'd arrived in. It was a discreet black sedan she had hired herself. Back in the penthouse, she packed a single bag. Not with clothes or jewelry, but with essentials. Her personal laptop, the original encrypted hard drive, a folder of personal documents, and a small framed photo of her and Damien from their wedding day. A reminder of what was lost and why she was fighting. As she worked, her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "The pieces are in place. Emergency meeting called. 7 a.m. Blackwood Tower." Another text came through. It was from Damien. "Where did you go?" "The press is asking." "This is humiliating." She didn't reply. She took one last look around the vast, empty apartment. The view of the city, the expensive art, the soulless perfection of it all. It was his cage, not hers. She had never truly belonged here. Her home would be one she built herself. She placed the framed wedding photo face down on the marble countertop. Beside it, she left her wedding and engagement rings, a nearly 20-carat diamond that had once graced the cover of magazines. They were symbols of a contract that had been broken, of a promise that had been desecrated. This was the moment she truly walked away. Not from the fight, but from the lie. She was no longer Mrs. Damien Blackwood, the billionaire's wife. She was Elara Vance, an architect of her own destiny. And tomorrow, she would begin drawing the blueprints for her new life and for his downfall. The silent coup was complete. The war was about to begin. The boardroom on the 95th floor of Blackwood Tower was a theatre of power. A colossal mahogany table sat under a coffered ceiling, surrounded by panoramic views of the city waking below. It was a room designed for intimidation, a place where fortunes were made and careers were destroyed. At 7 a.m., the board members filed in, their faces grim. The emergency meeting had been called by Julian Croft, citing a clause in the corporate bylaws for a matter of existential threat to the corporation. The air was thick with tension and unanswered questions. Margaret Clark, General McChrystal and Robert Blackwood exchanged uneasy glances. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Damian Blackwood swept in at 7:05 a.m., 5 minutes late, a deliberate power move. He was radiating irritation. His gala triumph had been soured by Alara's disappearance, and now this absurdly timed meeting. "Julian, this had better be worth pulling me out of post-acquisition strategy sessions," he snapped, taking his seat at the head of the table. "What is this existential threat you're talking about? The threat, Damian," Julian said, his voice cold and formal, "is you." Before Damian could react, the boardroom doors opened again. Alara Vance walked in. If the board was surprised before, they were utterly stunned now. She was not dressed for a gala. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress, her hair pulled back professionally. She was calm, focused, and she was carrying a leather portfolio. She took a seat next to Julian, directly across from her husband. Damian's face contorted with rage. "What the hell is this, Alara? This is a board meeting. You have no right to be here. Get her out of here, Julian. Mrs. Vance Blackwood is here at my invitation," Julian stated, his voice cutting through the room. "She is the primary witness and stakeholder in the matter at hand, and the matter is your gross dereliction of fiduciary duty." A projector screen descended from the ceiling. Julian clicked a button on a remote. The first image that appeared was the selfie of Damian and Isabella Rossi on the yacht in St. Bart's. A collective gasp went through the room. "While this board is not here to adjudicate the CEO's personal indiscretions," Julian began, his voice resonating with legal authority, "it is relevant when that indiscretion involves a subordinate executive, Miss Isabella Rossi, who has been granted unprecedented access and authority on the most sensitive deal in this company's history." He clicked again. A chart appeared, detailing Isabella's rapid promotions. Her salary increases far exceeding company policy and her placement on the Vantage Corp team. Damian sprang to his feet. "This is a private matter, a character assassination. My relationship with Miss Rossi has no bearing on my ability to run this company." "On the contrary," Alara said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but carried immense weight. "It has every bearing, because your private matter was funded by corporate assets." The next slide showed a litany of expense reports filed by Damian. First-class flights to St. Bart's, Zurich, and Monaco, all filed under Vantage Acquisition Travel. 5-star hotel suites at the Hotel de Paris, Monte Carlo. A $300,000 charge from Graff Jewelers, listed as corporate gifts for foreign dignitaries. Damian's face had gone pale. "This is insane. These are legitimate business expenses." "Then perhaps you can explain Project Cygnus," Julian said, delivering the killing blow. The screen now displayed the intricate web of shell corporations, the flow of funds siphoned from Blackwood Holdings, the land deeds in Nevada, and the geological maps of the proposed high-speed rail line. It was a criminal conspiracy laid bare in stark, undeniable detail. "This is insider trading," Margaret Clark stated, her voice shaking with fury. You used our capital to fund a personal criminal enterprise. And finally, Julian said, clicking to the last most damning slide. It was the incorporation document for Silver Arc Holdings, the Central Shell Company. And there in crisp black and white was the signature of its sole director, Isabella Rossi. The room erupted. Damien was being assailed from all sides. "You made your mistress a co-conspirator," his Uncle Robert asked, his voice filled with disgust. "You've exposed this entire company to federal investigation," General McChrystal boomed. Damien stood there, cornered and exposed. The charm, the arrogance, it all melted away, revealing a panicked man who had been caught. "This is doctored evidence. It's a lie. My wife is a scorned woman, trying to destroy me." "Is this a lie, Damien?" Elara asked, her voice cutting through the noise. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of the wire transfer confirmation for the initial funding of Silver Arc Holdings, a $15 million transfer from a Blackwood operational account that required the CEO's direct digital signature. A signature that was cryptographically verifiable. Checkmate. Damien sank into his chair, defeated. The fight was gone. Julian Croft cleared his throat. "In light of this evidence, which will be turned over to a forensic accounting team from Kroll, immediately the board must act. We are tabling a vote of no confidence in CEO Damien Blackwood and moving for his immediate termination for cause." "You can't do this," Damien whispered, a pathetic shell of the man who had entered the room. "We can and we must," Margaret Clark said. "I second the motion." "All in favor," General McChrystal commanded. Every hand in the room went up, except for Damien's. "It's done," Julian announced. "Damien, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." But Elara wasn't finished. "There is one more piece of business," she announced, standing up. "The issue of Damien's controlling shares." Julian addressed the board. "As you know, Damien's personal holdings grant him a controlling interest. Firing him is one thing, but he could still wage a proxy war and inflict untold damage. However, we have a remedy." He projected a copy of Clause 11B of Elara and Damien's prenuptial agreement. He explained its function in clear, concise terms. "Mr. Blackwood's actions constitute a clear and catastrophic breach of this clause," Julian concluded. "Julian, the harm to the shared marital asset, his stock in this company, is undeniable. Therefore, as per the agreement, his voting rights are to be immediately transferred to a blind trust for the benefit of his and Elara's unborn child." Damien looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. A blind trust was better than nothing. "And who is the trustee?" "The agreement is clear," Julian said. "The trustee with sole and absolute authority over all voting decisions is the other spouse. The trustee is Elara Vance." The silence in the room was absolute. Damien stared at his wife, his pregnant, betrayed wife, and finally he understood. She hadn't just come for revenge. She hadn't just come to expose him. She had come for everything. She had outmaneuvered him at every turn, using his own arrogance, his own contracts, his own crimes against him. The architect had designed his demolition, and on the boardroom battlefield, she was the last one standing. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Damien Blackwood, the titan of industry, was frog-marched out of his own building by security, his face a grey mask of disbelief. The news hit the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg terminals within the hour, not as a messy divorce scandal, but as a decisive corporate action. The official press release, drafted by Julian and approved by the board, was a masterpiece of strategic communication. It announced Damien's termination for gross financial misconduct, the launch of an internal investigation, and the board's full cooperation with regulatory authorities. The stock, predictably, took a nosedive in pre-market trading. The sharks were circling, smelling blood in the water. The empire was vulnerable, leaderless, and on the brink of chaos. Inside the boardroom, the stunned silence gave way to a frantic sense of urgency. "We need a leader," Margaret Clark said, pacing the room. "We need to appoint an interim CEO now to calm the markets before the opening bell. Someone who signals stability and a clean break from Damien." Names were thrown around, seasoned executives from other companies, board members themselves. But every option had a flaw. An outsider would take months to get up to speed. A current board member might be seen as part of the old guard. It was Robert Blackwood, Damien's uncle, who finally spoke the idea that was beginning to form in everyone's mind. "There is one person in this room who understands the intricacies of the situation better than anyone. One person who has demonstrated an unparalleled strategic mind, a commitment to the company's integrity, and who now, for all intents and purposes, controls its future." All eyes turned to Elara. She was sitting quietly, her hands resting on her belly, a portrait of calm amidst the storm she had created. The thought was audacious, unprecedented. She wasn't a seasoned CEO. Her background was in architecture and design, not corporate finance. "It's out of the question," one of the older board members stammered. The optics are perfect," Margaret Clark countered, her mind racing. "She's the ultimate outsider, untainted by the corruption. She's the one who exposed it. Appointing her sends the strongest possible message: the cancer has been cut out, and the person who saved the company is now in charge. It's a story of justice, not of chaos." General McChrystal nodded in agreement. "Leadership is about character and decisiveness. Mrs. Vance Blackwood has shown more of both in the last 24 hours than Damien has in the last 5 years." They turned to her, their expressions a mixture of desperation and hope. "Elara," Julian said gently, "can you do this? Will you do this?" Elara looked out the window at the sprawling city below. This was never her plan. Her goal was to protect her child's legacy, to remove a corrupt man from power. But now she was being offered the throne. She thought of her baby, the life growing inside her. What kind of world did she want to build for her child? A world where she ran from a fight, or a world where she stayed and reshaped the future? She met their gazes one by one. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. "Yes, I will do it, on several conditions." She laid them out with the precision of a master negotiator. Full authority to clean house, the board's unanimous public support, the budget to hire the best turnaround team in the country, and a new title on the door. Not interim CEO, but Chief Executive Officer. The board, seeing no better alternative, agreed unanimously. As news of Elara Vance's appointment as the new CEO of Blackwood Holdings broke, the market reaction was stunning. After an initial dip, the stock began to stabilize, then climb. Investors, it turned out, loved the drama, but they loved a story of a hero cleaning up a mess even more. Her background as an architect was spun as a positive. She was a builder, not a corporate raider. Her first day as CEO was a whirlwind. She held an all-hands meeting with the company's terrified employees. Standing before them, visibly pregnant, she was not the picture of a typical corporate leader, and that was her strength. "I know you are scared," she said, her voice echoing in the vast atrium. "You read the headlines and you are worried for your jobs and the future of this company. I am here to tell you that the era of secrets and corruption is over. The foundation of this company, built by Arthur Blackwood, was strong. It was corrupted by one man's greed, but it was not broken. We are not going to be defined by his failures. We are going to be defined by how we rebuild. Our new foundation will be one of absolute transparency and integrity. Now let's get to work. Meanwhile, Damien's world had completely disintegrated. Stripped of his job and his power, he was a pariah. His fair-weather friends stopped returning his calls. The clubs he frequented suddenly had no tables available. He was hit with a deluge of lawsuits from shareholders. He tried to contact Isabella Rossi, only to find her number disconnected. She had vanished. With the help of a high-powered lawyer, likely paid for with the last of her siphoned funds, she had cut a deal with the SEC, agreeing to testify against Damien in exchange for immunity. She had used him as a stepping stone, and now that he was sinking, she had leaped to the next one, leaving him to drown. He was left with his diminished personal wealth, a reputation in tatters, and the cold, hard reality of his own colossal stupidity. He had lost everything: his wife, his child, his company, his freedom, all for a fleeting affair and a greedy scheme. He had underestimated the woman he married, and in doing so he had authored his own destruction. The empire had a new queen, and the deposed king was left with nothing but the ruins of his reign. 8 months later, the view from the 95th floor office was the same, but the woman looking out was transformed. Elara Vance, now the mother of a beautiful 3-month-old daughter named Aurora, was no longer just the CEO. She was the architect of one of the most remarkable corporate turnarounds in recent history. The name Blackwood Holdings had been retired shed like a skin of the past. Under Elara's leadership, the company was rebranded as Solstice Group, signifying a new dawn. The culture of cutthroat arrogance was replaced with one of sustainable innovation and ethical governance. She divested from the toxic assets Damien had acquired, reinvesting in green technology and socially responsible enterprises fields she understood intimately from her previous career. She brought in a new leadership team, comprised of brilliant, diverse minds, who were drawn to her vision, not her pedigree. The stock price had soared, reaching all-time highs. The corner office, once Damien's masculine domain of dark wood and leather, was now bright and airy. Blueprints for a new sustainable urban development project were spread across a large table. In a quiet corner, a sleek, modern bassinet held the sleeping form of her daughter. Aurora was the true owner of this empire, and Elara was merely its fiercely protective steward. She had settled the legal matters with ruthless efficiency. Damien, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and insider trading. He was sentenced to 10 years in a federal minimum security prison. In the divorce settlement, Elara asked for nothing for herself, taking only what was legally hers through the prenup control of the trust for their daughter. She wanted none of his tainted money. The fortune she commanded now was one she had saved and rebuilt herself. The media had been captivated by her story, dubbing her the architect of Wall Street. She was a new kind of power player, a woman who had faced the deepest personal betrayal and emerged not as a victim, but as a visionary leader. A soft knock came at the door. It was Julian Croft, who now served as her most trusted advisor. He smiled warmly at her. "The board has unanimously approved the funding for the Singapore Vertical Farm project," he reported, "and Arthur Blackwood called. He wanted me to tell you again how proud he is of what you've done. He said you're more of a Blackwood than his own son ever was." Elara smiled a genuine, peaceful smile. Earning the respect of the patriarch who had started it all meant more to her than any stock report. "Thank you, Julian," she said, "for everything." "You did this, Elara," he replied. "I just opened the door." After he left, she walked over to the bassinet and gently picked up Aurora, who was beginning to stir. She held her daughter close, inhaling the sweet, milky scent of her baby. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face and saw the future. This was her legacy. Not the wealth, not the power, not the skyscraper. It was the chance to build a better world for her daughter. She had walked through the fire of betrayal and emerged not just unscathed, but forged into something stronger. She had lost a husband, but had found herself. She hadn't just taken his fortune. She had redeemed it. Looking out at the endless expanse of the city with her daughter safe in her arms, Elara Vance felt a profound sense of peace. The gilded cage was a distant memory. This was her domain now, built on a foundation of integrity and strength, and from here she could build anything. Elara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. She didn't just get revenge, she engineered a resurrection. She turned her pain into power, her heartbreak into a legacy of integrity for her child. This wasn't just about a billionaire's downfall. It was about the rise of a queen who proved that the most formidable asset isn't wealth or power, but a brilliant mind that refuses to be broken. Her story teaches us that sometimes walking away is the first step toward taking over. What did you think of Elara's incredible strategy? Was it justice or the ultimate revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of strength and resilience, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true-life dramas. Thank you for listening.